That night, I'd had hardly any sleep at all. I was 6 months pregnant. Huge. It was the middle of January, and I was suffering with the heat of an Australian summer. And you were a snorer. So, about midnight, after I had held you up from going to bed by wanting to talk about our relationship, we parted, and you said that you love me and I should believe people when they say they love me. And then you shut the door to the bedroom and went off to sleep in the study, as was your wont. But I slept badly. I had lots of strange dreams. In one of the dreams, I dreamt that I was on a hospital gurney in the hospital corridors of Bunbury Hospital, and you were leaning over the hospital bed in the corridor and saying excitedly, "It's a girl, dear. It's Lily Eliza." But in the dream I was so confused because I wasn't booked in to have the baby at Bunbury Hospital, and I hadn't felt the labour. I didn't really remember the labour. I was just being told by you that it was a girl and it had already happened. It was so confusing. I woke up briefly and tossed and turned and eventually had another strange dream in which you were standing in front of me and you're holding out the wedding ring which I had hopped about 3 years before when we'd separated briefly. I hadn't replaced it only because my fingers were plump and our relationship was often still fraught, although we were content and at truce and had 4 fabulous children and another on the way. But I dreamt you were standing there holding out the wedding ring, having tracked it down somehow, and you were giving it back to me. But in the dream, the little horseshoe of diamonds that sat on top of the wedding ring was all broken, which was confusing. But when I woke up that morning, I thought, well, I must have had a bit of sleep if I'd dreamt, although I was still hot and bothered and grumpy and not ready to deal with a Monday. And I thought, well, you haven't come in for your morning shower and pre-work preparations, so it must still be early. So I lay there with a hot, bright January morning, outside my bedroom window, waited for you to stir and come in, because every morning, the routine, every workday morning, I would wake to the routine of you choking me with large clouds of brute deodorant sprayed from the ensuite, drifting out in noxious fumes from the ensuite bathroom through the walk-through robe and into the bedroom where I slept. And it was an infuriating routine, because I was like a hippie who had done away with aluminium deodorant and that sort of thing for the sake of the child I was carrying. But here you were every morning bathing me in an aerosol cloud of brute, as we called it in Australia, always pronouncing the T somehow. But when you didn't arrive, while I was lying there idly speculating, I thought, well, I must have finally got an hour of REM in somehow, and I must have missed your getting up out of bed and going to work. Confusing. But while I was lying there thinking about how I was going to try harder in the future to be a better wife and mum, and that day when I drove into Bunbury to buy all the kids' school books from the school book list, because they were going back to the beginning of term in a couple of weeks, I resolved that to show you, to demonstrate that I loved you, father of my children, and we were family, I would go to Cash Converters, the pawn shop, and try and find another ring that was like the original wedding ring, which was bought in 1989 and was of a common type. I was certain that there were probably loads in Cash Converters. I'd find one and I'd buy it and I'd wear it and I'd show it to you to show you I was committed to trying. While I was thinking this, our 5-year-old daughter appeared at my bedside, chiefly announced her little brother had done a poo in his nappy and then taken the nappy off, and then disappeared back into the lounge room, which made me very confused to think that the kids were up but you were not. So with a sigh, great, another Monday, another nappy to deal with, and oh so many more in the future. I heaved my bulk out of the bed, threw a dress over my head, and stepped into the lounge room to deal with the toddler, the poo, the nappy, and Monday. No sooner had I stepped into the lounge room, though, than I saw that our little boy, who was 2, was indeed naked and happily playing with your wallet and your keys on the coffee table. And as soon as I saw your wallet and your keys, there was a clench in my gut. I knew something was terribly wrong. I looked at the clock and the clock said 20 past 11, I thought. And I immediately thought, oh no, don't tell me I've finally got to sleep, but I've somehow overslept so badly that you'd be home for lunch in just a few minutes, and I hadn't achieved anything for the day despite all my good intentions. I'd slept so badly and felt so rotten with the heat and the pregnancy and everything that once again I was behind the 8 ball and you were going to be quite cross. But then if your wallet and keys were here, you must have decided to walk in the cool of the morning, and perhaps you needed your wallet to buy lunch, or perhaps you needed me to come and pick you up in the family van at lunchtime and bring you back. So I went to phone you at the office. When I went to open the study door, the knob wouldn't turn, it was locked. And I was so cross because once again you'd accidentally locked the study door upon your departure, and I would have to fiddle around with the funny little key that fit into the little pinhole lock in the centre of the doorknob. There was a bit of a knack to it. And try and get it open. I couldn't find the key initially. When I did find the key on top of the lintel and tried to get it to lock, it wouldn't seem to unlock, and every time I turned the knob it didn't seem to unlock at all, which was most frustrating and very confusing. I was getting angrier and angrier because the day was getting hotter and hotter, and I was getting sweaty and frustrated, and things were not off to a good start. And my goodness, I was going to give you such a serve when I got through to you at the office. And then I thought, well, you'd had a dreadful migraine the day before, so perhaps you were asleep on the couch in the study and hadn't heard in the commotion, or had heard the commotion and was ignoring it because you were feeling unwell and you were already simmering yourself with resentment that I'd made a late start and the kids were making a noise and you still had your headache. So I thought, well, I'd better go outside, go round to the study window and have a look in to see if you're asleep. And if you are, maybe tap on the window to get you to open the door, or just check you are okay, really. Went outside and peered in the study window. The blinds were across, but between the gap of the blinds and the windowsill I could see that you weren't on the couch, so you obviously had gone to work. And that made me even crosser. You had gone off to work, left the study door locked accidentally, and I couldn't get in to use the phone, and I needed to. The phone, supplied by the National Telecommunications Company, was the third in a series of the free ones that they mail out to you that had a ringer that was so low you couldn't hear it ring. Been posted back twice, and we were on the third. I could still barely ever hear it. So I was quite cross that with the door shut, someone could have been ringing me all morning and I would have known about it. Came back into the house. Had already dealt, of course, with the poo by this point, but the toddler was still running around, naked as the day he was born. And I tried once more, hot, cross, sweaty, fuming, to get into the study. I finally managed to get the knob to turn, but there seemed to be something resisting against the door, so I pushed, thinking you'd put something up against the door and a sulk because you weren't feeling well and you were punishing me in a passive-aggressive sort of way. I was confused, pushed a little harder, and I realised you were sitting against the door. Sulking, I thought. Sulking because you were cross that I had let the kids run around all morning making a racket when you were ill. But you didn't say anything, and you didn't jump up in a temper when I had banged the door against your back. So I was momentarily confused. And then I saw that your legs, which were outstretched straight in front of you, were dark. And you seemed to have dirt splashed up them, maybe. And I thought, well, maybe you'd gone outside early and given water to the hens and chickens, the chooks, and the black sand in the backyard around the chicken run had splashed up, as it would do under the force of a garden hose, and spattered your legs. But then I realised that your legs weren't dirty, they were mottled. They were mottled. Because the blood in your legs and your body had pulled away from them. And you were stone cold, motherless, dead. You used to always joke that if something ever happened to you, one look at my bookshelves full of Agatha Christie's and Patricia Cornwall's and Kathy Reich's and Jack the Ripper analyses would give the police exactly the right direction where to start looking. And here you were inside a locked room, stone cold dead. I shut the door. Our daughter says I screamed in that moment. I don't remember doing so. I may have. I shut the door for an instant, and my brain crazily thought, that must look fucking hilarious from the other side. Woman forces open door, sees dead body, shuts door again. But I didn't know why or how you were dead. But there's no doubt that you were, from what I had seen. So I took our daughter by the hand and said, "Run with me," and scooped her little brother up onto my hip, not caring about dirty bottoms at this point, and ran next door to where my parents lived to raise the alarm and do what had to be done in the circumstances. And as I ran next door, I thought of the moment maybe 3 years before, where I had taken our daughter's hand and said, "Run with me," and with her 2 brothers and herself, I ran next door 3 years before because I was frightened for my own life, because I thought I was in danger from you. And now 3 years later, your life seemed over, and I was once again running. I came in through the side door of my parents' house. They live next door. I called out to my mother, and when she came to meet me in the house, I needed to tell her what had happened. But our daughter, who was 5, was already a very clever reader, advanced for her age, who delighted in spelling out many words and spelling out DEAD in front of her would not save her from anything at all. And I needed my mum to take our daughter and her little brother away into the backyard, away from the wall phone, the 1970s wall phone, where I had countless conversations since I was a little girl, while I phoned the hospital and asked for an ambulance, although it was obviously too late. But a thing that must be done. And I wanted to protect my children in that instant, so my brain reeled in horror, and for the first time I understood the term reeled in horror. You feel as though physically you're doing somersaults backwards, from the unimaginable shift in circumstances, tragedy and grief has suddenly enveloped you. But there are still things that have to be done. I've always been good in a crisis. I looked at my mother, but the words wouldn't really come out because it seemed too ridiculous for words. It couldn't actually be happening. I looked utterly stricken, obviously. I can only imagine the expression of shock and horror upon my face. And my poor mother was looking directly into the face of her child and seeing that expression, even though the child was now 30 years of age. And I said, "It's okay. it's a nightmare and I will wake up in a second. I said it almost cheerfully because I felt certain that it must be the case. It was just a terribly, terribly real nightmare. But I didn't wake up. And so instead I had to think about how I was going to tell my mum in front of my children without doing them serious damage, as though I could prevent it. And so I literally spelled it out using the longer term to try and avoid our daughter's understanding. I said you had committed suicide in the study and I needed to phone the ambulance. My mother looked at me and she hadn't taken it in. She couldn't comprehend it, of course. Such a shocking thing. And she said, "What?" And I said, once again, that you had committed suicide. And I needed to phone the ambulance. And she said, "Oh no." And I said, "Oh yes." "It's too late." I said, "He's blue. I don't know how he's done it. But he's done it." She took the children outside. Thankfully, our two oldest sons were overnight at your mum's, and so I didn't have to tell them yet. I went to the war phone and I phoned the local hospital and I calmly explained that although it was too late because of the colour of your legs and I had not determined what had happened, but it had happened to a nursing sister that I'd known for very many years. Then I went back outside to my mother, who had our son on her lap and was holding him and rocking backwards and forwards. Crying in shock and PTSD because when she was a little girl, she'd lost her dad and then a stepdad and many other people. And our daughter was standing to one side of her, looking at her, watching her screaming, crying and rocking back and forth while clutching our son. And I thought, well, that's going to have a lasting effect. And my inner voice said, why do you have to be such a bitch even now? She's just had a horrible, horrible shock. I went outside to my mother and I said, the ambulance is coming. And she said, what are you going to do? Stay here? And I said, no, I'm going to go back. I can't leave him alone. I'll wait with him. So I ran back to our house. I went back into the study. I couldn't bring myself to open the door again. And I couldn't bring myself to try to get into the room because I knew it was too late, and I knew if I saw your face, I might go start raving mad, and I might not come back from that. Because I didn't know what you'd done, but I thought you had decided to take yourself over, and your last moments might have been unpleasant. And I would see that in your face, and I don't think I could have stood it. So I just called out to you through the door, "Don't you be dead. Don't you make me tell your children that you're dead." But you remained dead, or at least not answering. So I walked away from the door and went and sat on the veranda on an upturned Coke crate and waited for the ambulance. As I sat there, I was looking at an old kitchenette which had sat on the veranda for months and months and months. But it was only just the day before that you had started to strip it back with paint stripper and sandpaper and a scraper. And you finally made a start on it. And now it was peeling and looked in even worse condition. And you were gone, and it was all too much. And while I was looking at the kitchenette, thinking about just the day before how I'd sat on the Coke crate and laughed and joked and hung around with you while you were working on the kitchenette, it was while I was sitting there that I heard the toy, the siren, the beeps and the flashes, and my gut clenched again because I knew immediately that it was the little toy aeroplane that we had bought for our son. It was motion operated, and when you pushed it, it would go wee, 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 and the lights and whistles would go off. And I thought, oh my God. He was faking it. He's pulled another stupid trick to scare me. And I phoned the ambulance and said he's dead. And now he's still trying to scare me with that toy. My God, I opened the front room, stepped into the lounge room, and there was the toy aeroplane sitting all by itself in the middle of the lounge room floor, on the carpet. No one near it. And it was going off. The lights and the bells and the whistles flashing away all to itself in the middle of the lounge room floor with no one near it. And I stared at it in even more shock and confusion and said, "Stop it. You're scaring me. And it stopped. It stopped instantly. It didn't peter out. It just stopped. Cut off. As though a hand had been clamped around the throat of someone mid-scream. And I knew. I knew then that you were stone cold, motherless dead. But you were still there. I just couldn't see you anymore.